Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And this video is regarding the sentence that was handed down to Mr. Kelly today in the Northern District of Illinois. And I am going to read to you guys the Twitter notes from Dave Burns, who is a writer for the Courthouse News, I believe is the publication. I thought it was quite interesting that John Seidel, who's with the Chicago Sun-Times, and Jason Mesner, who was with the Chicago Tribune, they were in court and they were tweeting all morning, and then all of a sudden they just stopped tweeting. And so that told me they read the room, not so much the room, but the judge. Okay, and they decided that this wasn't going to turn out the way they were anticipating and decided to leave or something. Because in the notes that David Burns shared on Twitter, it says that Lennon Weber actually came in early and started court at 9:45 instead of 10 o'clock as it was supposed to be. So what I want to do, let me unplug that. Sorry about that. So I'm basically just going to read to you guys the tweets as they came out, and then I'll read you a couple of news articles or news stories that have also been published. But what I am going to do is order the transcripts for the hearing today, and then I can do another video, because at this point we're just going by the notes that people were writing who were in the courtrooms, and they actually had like 2 or 3 extra courtrooms open up. They had a courtroom for spectators. They had a courtroom for the credentialed press. And then I think they had another room for people that didn't have credentials. But it starts off by saying, "Good morning from the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in Chicago, where Mr. Kelly is due to be sentenced for his conviction. From last September, the sentencing hearing starts at 10 a.m. And then I also want to interject here something that I said in one of my videos when this trial was going on, and I had pointed out the fact that Judge Lennon Weber is well into his 80s, I believe, and I felt that he was going to see this case differently. He was going to see it for what it was and would be able to differentiate between these young women being involved with this older man, which is something that was commonplace in his growing up and his upbringing, opposed to people who were following the Me Too movement and going, oh my God, this is horrendous, this is trafficking, this is all these things, when in fact what it was an older man. And also keep into consideration when we say older, they keep wanting to paint the picture of Kelly at his current age messing with 16 and 17-year-olds, when in reality he was in his late 20s, early 30s when this was taking place. And so I thought that Lennon Weber was going to be able to see through all of this, right, and come down, to the right decision based on the verdict that was given. So basically it says that Kelly is already serving a 30-year sentence from a 2021 trafficking conviction in New York City. The big question of the day is whether Kelly will be allowed to serve his new sentence concurrently with the New York case, or if he will have to serve both consecutively. And then for those of you who don't know the difference, concurrently means that if you were given 10-year sentences, you would only spend 10 years in jail. If you were given 10-year sentences and they were consecutively, you would have to spend 100 years in jail. They would be you would serve one sentence at a time. And so that was the big question, because the prosecutors wanted him to do consecutive sentences, meaning that whatever he sentenced Mr. Kelly to would be on top of the New York sentence. So he's been sentenced to 30 years in New York. They wanted to add another 25, meaning that he would have to serve a total of 55 years before he was eligible for release. So it goes on to say most reporters, myself included, are currently set up in a press overflow room down the hall from the main courtroom. We'll have audio but no video, just like during the trial itself last September. About 20 minutes out from the hearing, and then he goes, or not, federal judge Harry Lennon Weber is starting the hearing about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. And it goes on to say Kelly's attorney, Jennifer Bonjean, raises objections to what she calls misstatements in prosecutors' sentencing memos. For example, the statement that Kelly's involvement with Mya was over a period of time. It was exactly a 2-time occurrence, Bonjean says. And you guys can check out the video that I released this morning where it actually goes into detail about how Mya met him in Chicago and then she flew herself. He didn't fly her, she flew herself to Minnesota to one of his concerts, and then she later told her parents she wanted to go spend the summer with her relatives in Chicago, and she ended up going to his studio. He invited her, or didn't even invite. Well, I guess he did invite. She called and said she was in town and she wanted to bring her cousins to the studio, and he said okay. So I guess technically he didn't invite her, but she went to the studio. And that was it. Never saw him again after that. So Lennon Weber takes Bonjean's objections under advisement. Hold on a second. Let me get back where I was at. Under advisement and notes them for the record. He asks Kelly if he has had a chance to read the pre-sentence report. He states that he has. Lennon Weber then asks Kelly if there's anything he'd like to object to in the pre-sentence documents or any other issues. And Mr. Kelly said no, that he was relying on Jennifer Bonjean to do the right thing. And whatever I guess she decided, he was okay with. So Lennon Weber agrees with Bonjean against the government that Kelly's actions toward the young women with whom he was involved constituted enticement, not coercion, i.e., the girls feared a loss of affection and attention, not any kind of bodily harm. And this was important to me because if you guys remember during the trial, when the jury got the case, the indictment and the jury instructions, there were like 5 words: coercion, enticement, and some other words, right, that they claim he did in order to get them to do what he wanted them to do. And so it was like 3 or 4 words, comma, 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 and the last word. And the jury was confused, and they were saying, okay, does it mean that all 5 words have to apply, or can we base our decision on 1 word? And so if Judge Lennon Weber had said, no, you have to follow the instructions as given, Mr. Kelly would have been found not guilty on all counts in that Chicago case. But the judge allowed the prosecution to change the word and from or, meaning that they only had to choose 1 word in order to find him guilty, which is what happened. And for those of you who don't know, it was a 13-count indictment. He was found guilty on 6 counts and not guilty on the other 7. And so what he's pointing out in this statement is that it constituted enticement, meaning he enticed them. He enticed them with his fame, whatever, but he did not coerce them. And that meaning that if they weren't enticed by the fact that he was this R&B singer, rising career, had money, fame, they could travel and all this stuff, then he would have been okay. Go ahead about your business. He didn't coerce them by saying, oh, you got to come and do this. You better come or this is going to happen. And that was very important. But had he made the right ruling during jury deliberations, we would not be here today. So then it goes on to say prosecutors disagreed, noting some of Kelly's victims said they felt compelled to, and I think compel was one of the other words, compelled to perform the acts Kelly requested of them. After some back and forth, Lennon Weber rejects this argument, again noting the accusers never mentioned a threat of bodily harm. As to whether Kelly's CP charges merit a trafficking enhancement, Lennon Weber finds they don't. And he pretty much found that they don't is because the videos were done for his personal benefit. he wasn't trying to sell them. So trafficking means that you're trying to sell it. You're trying to satisfy a need in the world of people, of consumers that are attracted to this kind of stuff. And he wasn't trying to do that, which is why the other 7 charges were not guilty, because somebody stole those tapes from him. Lisa Van Allen stole those tapes from him, and that's how they ended up on the market. It was never his intention for those tapes to leave his possession. And so that's why he's saying he disagrees. So the government begins the sentencing presentation, starting with a prepared statement from Rishona via her attorney. So I don't know if Rishona was there or not, but they're saying via her attorney. When I think of all I have lost due to Robert, all I can do is cry, the statement says. When you lose your virginity too, and then she uses the P word, and claims again that she was 14 when we know in fact she was either 16 or 17. Your life is never your own. Rishona's statement continues saying she had sex with Kelly hundreds of times against her will, which in the testimony you didn't say it was against your will. You were a willing participant. Her words, not ours. She did it because she wanted to. And then it goes on to say Robert was abusive and dominating. And at this point, it starts to sound like they've taken the transcript from the Eastern District of New York case where Geronda Pace was testifying and making that Rishona's words. Because just listen to this and tell me if it sounds familiar. It says, the rules I was forced to follow for years because I thought I needed him were degrading. Her statement continues saying she sometimes couldn't go to the bathroom without his permission or had to go without eating for days. Government prosecutors are now up, urging Kelly to serve a sentence of 300 months, which equals 25 years, consecutively to the 30 years he is already serving for his New York conviction. Appenting now accuses Kelly's attorneys of minimizing his involvement with underage girls, particularly with Mya. One cannot quantify the trauma of abuse, she says. She adds that the 56-year-old Kelly has proven that he cannot control his impulses. His lack of responsibility for his criminal conduct, even in the face of irrefutable video evidence, demonstrates that he poses a risk of recidivism, meaning that he'll repeat the behavior. Appleton says she adds Kelly's own abusive upbringing does not excuse his actions. The only way to ensure he does not reoffend is to impose a sentence that will keep him in prison for the rest of his life. So Lennon Weber asks why Kelly shouldn't be allowed to serve his sentence concurrently. The incremental harm that he inflicted warrants incremental punishment, Appleton answers. So then Kelly's attorney, Jennifer Bonjean, is now up to deliver her own statement on Kelly's sentencing. Bonjean dismisses the government's accusation that Kelly has engaged in victim blaming. The idea that Kelly has failed to take responsibility, the government knows that's not true. Bonjean says that Kelly's relationship with his accusers, particularly Rishona, was far more complex than prosecutors want to admit. She says the government's comparison of Kelly to professional traffickers in CP is unfair. Bonjean, reaching back to Kelly's 2002 indictment and Rishona's family initially wanting nothing to do with it, the government puts a lot of emphasis on this obstruction count on which Mr. Kelly was acquitted in 2008. This was not so much obstruction as a family deciding they didn't want to participate, Bonjean said. Bonjean then points out, y'all know me with this slider on my computer. So Bonjean then points out a perceived double standard between Rishona saying that abuses changes one's life and the government not wanting to consider Kelly's own abuse as mitigation. This abuse lasted for years by a sister and a neighbor, Bonjean emphasized. Kelly's negative childhood experiences are linked to his negative outcomes as an adult. Bonjean says, adding, he was regularly disciplined with whips, switches, and belts. This was normalized, so you can't just say he should have overcome it, Bonjean says. Bonjean also says Kelly's effective illiteracy should be taken into account. saying it prevented him from seeking help for his trauma and blinded him to more canny individuals who took advantage of him. These are adverse conditions that continue through life, Bunjin urges of Kelly's own abusive upbringing. And guys, I did a video this morning, if you haven't seen it already, where it goes in depth into what Bunjin is talking about here at this hearing, and basically the sentencing memorandum on what she wanted the court to know, wanted the judge to know about this case, and why the sentence should be concurrent and not consecutive, and why he deserved a lesser sentence, actually pointing out that the United States sentencing, what did I say the name? Sentencing, USSG. But it's the probation office that does the sentencing guidelines. And she basically says that the officer who did the report misinterpreted or purposely put in information that wasn't true. It was inaccurate. And that the numbers that was given to the government were false, untrue numbers, because they did not apply to Mr. Kelly's case. So you guys go and check that out to learn more. So Mr. Burns' notes continue, and it says, continuing, Bunjin argues that the government is pursuing an excessive sentence and wanting Kelly to spend an additional 25 years behind bars. His current sentence, she says, is already an effective life sentence. He only has one life to give, Bunjin argues. Bunjin says the government is seeking to punish Kelly for conduct on which he was acquitted in 2008, which would be a constitutional violation. Bunjin puts forward her own sentencing suggestion for Kelly, 168 months, which equals 14 years, to be served concurrently with his 30-year New York City conviction, or New York, she got NYC, but it's Eastern District of New York conviction from 2021. And she went on to talk about black men with diabetes do not live into their 80s in prison. They want a symbolic sentence for themselves, Bunjin added. To suggest that he's not being punished is frankly absurd. Bunjin again attacks the government, seeming to want to make an example of Kelly. Just because you give Kelly 50 years, 100 years, does not solve the problem of exploitation in this country. Jennifer wasn't playing. She was in there fighting for her client, and she wasn't throwing out there about Martin Luther King and all this other nonsense. So I hope them folks from New York taking notes on how this should be done. So Bunjin again attacks the government. Okay. And then it says, we never minimize the crimes for which he was convicted, Bunjin argues, but adds that a concurrent sentence is sufficient. She concludes by saying that a consecutive sentence is overkill. So now the moment that everybody has been waiting on. Judge Linen-Weber is ready to speak. So he asks Kelly if he wants to make a statement on his behalf. And of course, Kelly said he does not. Linen-Weber now giving his own musing on the case and considers how he would have weighed the case before the COVID-19 pandemic. He stated, this sentence that I would have given before the pandemic would have been higher than the guidelines. And what that tells me is that he did some research during this 3-year wait for New York to go to trial. He started researching, okay? And he realized what this case really was. So Linen-Weber says, the question of consecutive versus concurrent is irrelevant. He also says that he's going to sentence Kelly to a minimum consecutive sentence of 1 year, but hasn't clarified what that means. Then he went on to say that he will take Kelly's age into consideration in sentencing, as well as his prior 30-year sentence with New York. On the issue of deterrence, Linen-Weber says age is again a factor, as is his loss of wealth and status. Kelly's risk of recidivism when he's in his 80s is minimum. Linen-Weber, in his 80s himself, says that 80-year-olds are more worried about arthritis and their prostate than young girls. Breaking. Kelly's official sentence for his Chicago conviction on CP and enticement charges, he'll serve 20 years, 19 years concurrently, and 1 year consecutively to his prior 30-year sentence. Lennon Weber also says that Kelly may be eligible for supervised release after serving 3 concurrent years in prison. He imposes no fines due to Kelly's lack of ability to pay. So when he says 3 years in prison, he's already served 4 years. So does this apply to the time that he spent awaiting to go to trial in New York and in Chicago? Or does it count since he was convicted in 2021? Does that mean he's already served 2 years of the 3 years? So it would be interesting to see if how Banjin handles this. Like if she will push the fact that, okay, he's done with the Chicago sentence. That would be interesting to see. Excuse me. And then it will also be interesting to see if she will still move forward. I mean, it wouldn't change the sentence or his ruling if she still moves forward with the appeal. So it's going to be interesting to see how she plays her cards with the Chicago case in post-trial motions. And, he's already denied the motion for a new trial and the motion for appeal. But it will be interesting to see how she handles a appeal, to the federal court level of appeals, or if she'll just accept this. And I believe it'll come down to how that 3 year concurrent years in prison plays out, whether or not we've already amended the 20 years, right? So then it goes on to say Lennon Weber rules on restitution, $42,000 for Pauline, with additional restitution denied as to Rishona and Nia. With that, Lennon Weber concludes Kelly's sentencing hearing. Then full story on the day's events coming shortly. So then John Seidel, who was one of the bitter Bettys, who was in court but then didn't live tweet because it wasn't going the way they wanted, he did do an article, and he's with the Sun-Times. He says that District Court Harry Lennon Weber gave Kelly 20 years, but said 19 of those could be served at the same time as his sentence for a federal racketeering conviction in New York. 1 year is to be served after the New York sentence is completed. Kelly is 56 and could be locked up until he's in his late 70s. And let's see what information he has that wasn't a part. It says this story will be updated throughout the day, but he says that federal judge decided Thursday that Kelly should serve an additional year in prison for his conviction in Chicago last year, finally resolving the most serious criminal cases against the R&B superstar, who is already serving 30 years behind bars. Judge Lennon Weber gave Kelly 20 years, but said 19 of those could be served at the same time as his sentence for a federal racketeering conviction in New York. 1 year is to be served after the New York sentence is completed. Kelly is now 56 and could be locked up until he's in his late 70s. No matter what I do, Mr. Kelly isn't going out the door after today, Lennon Weber said. He's not going out the door in the next 10 years. He's not going out the door in the next 20 years. Well, God has the final say on that, sir. So bear in mind, he's 56 years old, and his attorney, Banjin, points out he has a life expectancy of not a hell of a lot more, 8-10 years, the judge added. And I thought, how rude of y'all to be sitting there saying what this man's life expectancy is going to be, like he's only going to live another 8 or 10 years. I was just like, how rude and disrespectful must y'all be? So the prosecutors had sought to add as much as 25 years to Kelly's prison time, citing the depravity of his sentence, of his crimes. Hold on, I'm stuck again. Of his crimes against these individuals. But the judge noted how old Kelly would be when he leaves prison and said he did not believe Kelly would continue to be a threat. Bonjean Kelly's lawyer said she intended to appeal the sentence. Earlier, she had said any additional sentence would be overkill. The judge ordered Kelly to pay $42,000 in restitution to one of the victims in the case, known as Pauline, during the trial, but he denied claims from two other women in the case, known as Rishona and Mya, saying they already reached a settlement with Kelly in a civil suit. Actually, Mya is the only one that reached a settlement. It says, obviously, these three ladies are seriously injured, Lennon Weber said, but it doesn't seem restitution is the proper vehicle to do that. Prosecutors had sought at least $11 million in restitution, but Bonjean countered that the Fed's numbers were outrageous and without support. The sentencing hearing began with all three women telling the judge why they thought Kelly should spend the rest of his life in prison. Then Pauline said, I have lost so much due to this. She accused Kelly of pitting her against her friend Rishona, another victim who testified at Kelly's trial, and they no longer talk. An attorney for Rishona read a statement from her. Robert shattered me. I need closure, and I need Robert in jail for as long as possible. Why y'all think Rishona didn't read her own statement? I'm just asking. Let's see. As long as law will allow. Okay, so Mya said she was not a revengeful person, but that the judge should sentence Kelly to stay behind bars for the rest of his life. You came before this judge because something is wrong with you, Mya said, addressing Kelly as he sat with his attorney in the courthouse. Kelly went to trial in Chicago. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Some legal experts said the case offered insurance in the event Kelly's New York conviction. Okay, well, I'm glad they're pointing that out, that the only reason they brought him to trial in Chicago was insurance in case the New York conviction is overturned. So the verdict also brought potential closure to a decades-long saga in Kelly's hometown. The star witness in Chicago case was a woman known in court as Jane, but everybody in the world knows as Rishona Landfair. Now in her late 30s, she has long been at the center of abuse allegations against Kelly, and Kelly's attorneys recently revealed that she is seeking millions in restitution from the star. In one of the stalker moments in Kelly's, I don't know if that's the word he meant to use, but that's the word he used, was stalker. Or stalker. Okay, I think that's what he meant. Okay, moments in Kelly's Chicago trial. Jurors watched snippets from 3 videos depicting Kelly's abuse of Rishona. Rishona met Kelly in the mid-1990s. She claimed she was 12 or 13, but her mom said that she was 14. And she said that they were introduced by her aunt. Rishona eventually asked Kelly to be her godfather, but their conversations later turned sexual, once in the wee hours at Kelly's studio. She said that he groped her on a couch. Rishona said that Kelly began to abuse her. Wait a minute. When she was about 14, it turned to sexual intercourse when she was 15. She told the jury the abuse occurred innumerable times, like uncountable. And let's see, the Chicago jury also convicted Kelly for his abuse of 2 others who were underage at the time, Pauline and Mya. Pauline declared to the jury that she and Kelly effed a lot. Now in her late 30s, she said Rishona introduced her to Kelly when she and Rishona were 14. She said her abuse by Kelly turned to intercourse when she was 15 or 16, and she said she participated in numerous threesomes with him and Rishona. Mya, now in her early 40s, says she met Kelly at 15 in 1996. She said Kelly touched her breast and masturbated in a hotel room after a concert in Minneapolis, and he once fondled her in a hallway. I mean, the way that sounds like Mya might be the person in the Minnesota case. Don't that sound like the same story as the person that sued him in the Minnesota case? Isn't that what that person said? But anyway, child, we know she met him in Atlanta, so maybe it's not her. So all of the articles are pretty much saying the same thing, so I'm not going to get into any more of those articles. But once again, Mr. Kelly was sentenced to 20 years, which will be served. So once again, Mr. Kelly was sentenced to what amounts to 21 years. 20 years will be served concurrently with the New York sentence that he's serving for 30 years. However, he is eligible for supervised release after 3 years, and we have to wait to determine what that 3 years look like. Is it the 3 years he's already served from 2019, his arrest in 2019 to now, or is it 3 years, like actually the beginning of the New York sentence, 3 years, and then there's an extra year that is tacked on to the New York sentence, basically meaning that the most he will ever serve is 31 years. But then I believe in federal court there is some type of reduction, like maybe you only serve 80% or something like that. I used to think that New York didn't have that type of reduction, that you serve day for day. But I have started to learn from people that I have talked to who have been to federal prison that no, it's 80% of your sentence is the max, is what the minimum you would serve is 80% of your sentence. So as I stated in the beginning, I am going to get the transcript, and then I will do a video with the transcript so we know exactly what was said in court and what's what, and then also get these sentencing documents and that information and get it to you. So that's it for me, guys. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, share the video, and I shall talk to you guys later. Oh, and leave your comments below, and I shall talk to you guys later. Bye bye.